Go.
Right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Adam Parrish. Today I'm going to be doing a presentation on axis deviation. It's kind of an advanced cardiac topic, so hopefully we'll have a little better understanding by the end of the presentation. If any point during the presentation any of you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them. I don't care what you do, throw your hand up, say it out loud, whatever, because we're going to kind of be going over the basics, like building onto it, doing steps and building onto it. So if you're kind of confused on something and want a little more clarification, go ahead and ask before we move on, because then you'll really be lost then. But we'll start off with a little bit of anatomy, physiology of the heart, because it is a cardiac topic, and I don't know how much exposure some of you may or may not have to the topic, so we're going to start with the basics a little bit and then move into the main topic within a little bit. So basically, I'll move around here so I can kind of point at things. Here's a picture of your heart. One thing I do need to say is when you're looking at this heart from your point of view, you'll notice that it's backwards. When you're looking at it, it says this is the right side and this is the left side. The reason for that is you're looking at the front of the heart. So if you're looking at that heart's in my chest, you're looking at me. To me, standing in front of you, this is my right and this is my left. To you, it's backwards. But everything we're going to look at is going to be like that. So when I say right and I'm pointing over here to the left, I'm not crazy. That's just how
right.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
So mainly too, we'll talk about the four main chambers of the heart. Your heart's a big pump, and it has four main chambers that pump blood to different parts of your body. You have your right and left atrium, and your right and left ventricles. Now we're not going to get too much into what all they do exactly. Just know there are those four main chambers. Like the top and bottom is basically split in half. You have the two small chambers on top and two big ones on the bottom. We're going to go over this. This is the kind of electrical pathways of the heart. And this one is big because this is what axis deviation is. It's what it's measuring. These are the nerves that run throughout your heart. Everybody's is a little bit different. They're laid out mostly this way, but it's kind of like a fingerprint, where everybody's is a little bit different. This is the same way. It's all laid out just a little bit different, but for the most part follows this general directions here. The first major thing right here is this little hump. Let's kind of block your view. Little hump right up here. It's called the SA node, or sinoatrial node. That's the main pacemaker for the heart. Your heart gets an electrical impulse from your brain, and then it basically hits right here, and that triggers the rest of the heart down the electrical pathways to beat in the fashion it does. So then you have these other little these electrical pathways that make the top parts of your heartbeat, your atrium. As it goes down there, it hits this second little node, and that's called the AV node, or the atrioventricular node. The reason there are two small nodes is because your heart, the top half and the bottom half, they don't beat at the same time. If you ever heard your heart beat, it always sounds that dum 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 dum. That's because the top and bottom's beating at different times. Fairly close to each other, but not at the same time. Because basically these fill the bottom part, so they have to shoot blood into the bottom for them to send it into the lungs or the body, depending on which one. But anyway, it goes from there down into these, they call them bundle branches, and that's what causes all the ventricles to fire. Okay. Bless you. Alright, so what we got here is kind of the basic lead placements for an EKG. If you've ever, I don't know, done one, anybody in the medical field, or I've been to a doctor's office where they did an EKG, or they maybe said they took a picture of your heart, something like that. This is kind of what they did. This is a basic EKG. It can be called both a 3-lead and a 4-lead. It's the exact same thing. It's just different names, and the reason for it is it's called a 4-lead because there are actually 4 electrodes or 4 stickers they would put, and you can see either on the wrists and ankles or your shoulders, and you can do the thighs or bottom of your stomach or something. Doesn't really matter. The placement, it really doesn't matter. Some people argue either way, but it doesn't matter. So that's why they call it 4 lead. There's 4 electrodes. It's also called a 3 lead because the one on your right leg actually is just a ground. It does nothing. It doesn't measure anything. It's just a ground. So it's called can also be called a 3 lead because only 3 of them actually do anything. But it will not work unless the ground is on there, so it is somewhat functional, I guess. It doesn't actually measure anything with your heart or see or do anything. So, well, now it's a little bit of history. And this does play into our topic some. I'll introduce y'all to what's called Einthoven's triangle. When it comes to axis deviation, it's really important to understand what this is. Some of this stuff over here is just a little bit of history, though. Einthoven's triangle was created by a man named Willem Einthoven. He was a Dutch physiologist. And in 1903, he created the first external EKG machine. Before he created his EKG machine, the only way to get a true EKG on someone or something, an animal or whatever, was to actually cut their chest open and place electrodes directly onto their heart. So it wasn't something that was done much, so if you had heart problems, they didn't really know what was going on, you had heart problems.
Yeah.
So he created the first true external EKG called the string galvanometer. Basically, he used a bunch of magnets and electricity and stuff to amplify the electricity going through your heart so it could read it. The string galvanometer weighed about 600 pounds and took 5 people to operate. So we've definitely come a long way. Now they've got portable ones that I carry at work that's yay big and weighs about 12 pounds or so. So that's much better. It takes 1 person to use it. And I'll explain a little bit more about what Einthoven's triangle is because, like I said, it is quite important. Alright, so in Einthoven's triangle, like we talked about earlier with the EKG, the 3 lead or 4 lead, you have only 3 leads that actually measure anything. That's your right arm, and left leg leads. What they do is basically they would sit, the right arm and left arm are kind of up here or on your wrist or whatever, and left leg down here making a triangle basically, with your heart being more or less right in the middle. What they do is they measure the direction the electricity is flowing in your heart by telling if the electricity is flowing away from or towards certain leads. It can tell which way the electricity is flowing in your heart. And that's important because certain cardiac conditions or injuries to the heart, like heart attacks or trauma and stuff like that, can cause the electrical pathways to get messed up. All those nerves and stuff we looked at, they can kind of get messed up, and then electricity flows some weird way in your heart, and that's a way to tell something's not right. It's not flowing right, something has happened, and then it warrants a little further investigation. So what we'll see here is, you can see the torso of a person with their heart there, and there's all these lines and numbers everywhere. What those are basically angles. Have you ever heard of like a 90-degree angle is a perfect L shape and 180 degrees flat? I mean, 360 is all the way around. It's degrees. And basically, normal, what we consider, and I'll go over this a little bit more in just a second, but what's considered a normal axis deviation is anything from negative 90 to positive 90 degrees. The reason for that is, get back a little bit. Right one, yes. When the electricity is flowing in your heart, like we showed earlier, it starts way up here in this corner up here and works its way down. So when the electricity is flowing in a normal direction, see here was the top of the heart going down. The electricity flows in mostly this direction. It's normal. That's the way it should be flowing. Anything other than that is abnormal. You'll kind of, I don't know if y'all can make it, I don't know how well it's showing up, But you can kind of see this little bit shaded area right here. That's the normal axis deviation kind of range there. And I think my next slide will show it a little bit better. But like I said, the negative 90 to 90 is truly normal axis deviation. They've included this negative 90 up to negative 30 over here. That's my next slide. I'll just move it up. All right. That's what they call a physiological left axis deviation. Basically, it is technically a left axis deviation. It's not perfectly normal, but some people's electrical pathways just kind of run a little more in that direction, and it's not anything dangerous. It's maybe not technically normal, but it's not dangerous. That's about the only one that's kind of a little weird like that, where a part of it could be normal or it's left. It's different names or anything. But between that kind of 0 and negative 30 is the physiological left axis deviation, which is also technically normal. From anything from negative 30 up to negative 90 is true left axis deviation. So electricity in your heart is kind of flowing across from the way it normally would. So something is wrong and it's kind of flowing in some crazy direction. And a little bit later, toward the end of the presentation, I'll go over different stuff that can cause all these different deviations and talk about like what some of it is. Then down here from positive 90 all the way around to 180 is what we call right axis deviation. It's not totally backwards, but it's flowing kind of crossways, opposite from the left. It's going all kind of crazy, not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then we have extreme right axis deviation. That one's really bad, because that's literally completely backwards from the way it should be flowing. Usually that means the rhythm, whatever your heart is doing, it's originating down the bottom of the heart, and that's usually a fatal rhythm. So if that's going on, you are more than likely either dead or about to die. It's very, very bad. So now we kind of got a little understanding of the basic anatomy and kind of what we're measuring, the electrical pathways of the heart and everything. We'll kind of get into the basics of how to read an EKG, because this is how you would be able to really determine it when you put those leads on and did a printout. It would print out an EKG, and it'll also print out numbers on the side of it, which I've got pictures of later. And there are a bunch of different ways that you can determine axis deviations, and I'll go over some different methods. And you can see I've got it labeled as EKG/ECG. A lot of people will call them either one, or some people might think that it's a different term, but it's really not. It's the exact same. The main reason that there is kind of a difference is originally back in 1903 when Willem Einthoven created this machine, he called it the EKG, because in Dutch the word for cardio was cardia, and it starts with a K in Dutch instead of cardio in American English. It starts with a C. So they're the exact same thing, just kind of different languages almost, but they're the same. Alright. So, you want to see over there? Alright. Some of this is a little kind of grainy. You can't see all that great, but it's okay, because we're not really talking too much about all this little stuff over here. We're talking about these big letters mostly that we can easily see. So the first major thing that we see, this first kind of hump right here with the P over it, is called the P wave. What that is those top two chambers of your heart, the small ones, the atriums. That signifies the atriums firing. They're squeezing that blood down into the ventricles like they're supposed to. So the next thing is you see the Q, an R, and an S. They're usually clumped together in what we call a QRS complex. And what that is those two big chambers on the bottom of your heart firing. It's so much bigger because those chambers are so much bigger. That picture that I showed you earlier doesn't seem to be quite anatomically perfect. Those atriums are actually a good bit smaller than they appear on that picture. So they're quite a major size difference, and that's why you kind of see that on here. This is such a small little blip when those two fire off and squeeze, but when those big ones on the bottom fire off, it's a huge, noticeable, giant spike. Also, when how your heart works is when the electricity travels through them, they kind of like discharge, and then they also have to recharge after that. So your atrium do it, but them recharging is buried somewhere in here, and you can't see it. There's no way to see it on doing a regular old EKG. But this, what they call it, the T wave over here, is these big ventricles recharging. It just shows up. There's so much electricity flowing back into them, basically, that you can see it on an EKG. When they do it, it's so small that even if it wasn't buried in here, you might not even be able to notice it, or it'd be like this itty bitty little thing that you hardly be able to tell what it even is. What?
Time to.